So the TGS presentation for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth happened recently, and I think the best way to describe it was a little bit chaotic, at least for those of us who were watching it in English. So the translators were put into a pretty tough position here, and they were doing their very best to translate everything being said live to all of us that don't speak a word of Japanese, which the panel didn't exactly make easy. The developers were constantly going back and forth, talking basically non-stop, and these poor translators were trying their very best to articulate everything that was being said, and unfortunately, it didn't come out very well, and also was pretty hard to understand. But luckily, that starting panel was mostly filler. The developers were mainly going over how excited they were to show off Rebirth, what Final Fantasy VII meant to them all, and how much they loved the original. After all that, we got to the best part of the event, where the developers booted up the game, and we got to see a ton of gameplay. And so what we saw was the starting area right outside of Midgar, which in the original was a very tiny area. They spent a good 30 minutes showing this place off. And just for context, this is a map of the original Final Fantasy VII, and this area right here is where the developers were running around. You really get a sense of just how much they added. And just to drive that point home, after around 30 minutes of exploration, they opened up the map, and we got to see just how little of it they actually explored. You know, one of the biggest issues with Final Fantasy XV was the developers created this huge open world that was mostly empty. There was practically no reason to go out and explore, there really wasn't much to go do and see, but from what we've seen so far with Rebirth, it looks like the developers have taken a lot of lessons from what other open world games have been doing. So anyone who's played Remake probably remembers Chadley. Well, he's followed us out of Midgar, and he's still willing to help us out and give us materia. That is, if we are willing to help him out with his research yet again. This time around, he wants us to go out and explore the open world. Much like many other open world games, there are towers that you can find and interact with, and when you do, they show various points of interest. So, as an example, there are various notorious monsters that you can go out and challenge, and when you do, they have optional conditions that you can then try for, such as beating them in a certain time frame, staggering, and so forth. So whenever you defeat these monsters, they leave a marker that lets you retry them. So if you missed any of those conditions, you can try for them again. You can also choose to increase the level of the encounter if you're looking for more of a challenge. Other than fighting notorious monsters, another reason to explore is finding materials. So while the developers were exploring, you could see tons of shiny stuff scattered all over the place, just begging to be collected. And then you can take those materials and use them to craft various items, such as health potions. It's a very basic concept that we see in lots of open world games, but you know, it works. So another thing you can find while out exploring are these really cute and tiny chocobos. So if you follow them, they guide you to a station where you can put up a signpost, which then becomes a place that you can fast travel to. There's also a bench to rest on, and you also get a currency that you can trade to customize your chocobos. So speaking of chocobos, much like in the original, you need to capture your first chocobo, and in Rebirth, you need to be stealthy and sneak up on them. You can even distract them by throwing rocks. And once you're successful, you hop up on top of them, you try to soothe them, and then you are good to go. So what's really nice is that you can see your entire party riding, including Red 13, who looks hilarious on the back of a chocobo. And also, while you're out riding, it's not only faster, but your chocobo can also smell hidden items. So riding on your chocobo is also a good way to find more rare resources. Yet again, giving you even more reasons to go out and explore. So another really fun addition is that you can dress up your chocobo. There are various outfits that you can purchase, and you can even change around the colors and mix and match them however you want. And the way that you get the currency for those outfits is by following those cute little chocobos out in the world. Yet again, giving you more reasons to go out and explore. So the last thing to mention are the Chocobo ranches, which now seem to have much more of a presence than they did before. In the original game, they just had the one ranch near Kalm, but now we know there's also one near Junon, and I think that makes much more sense for the world. Of course, there would be multiple ranches to accommodate all of the different areas. So the different towns around the world were a huge part of the original Final Fantasy VII, and we got to see some of the very first town that you visit, the town of Kalm. And it looks fantastic. Like many of the towns in Remake, they expanded on it greatly, filled it up with people, and from what we saw, it just looks so lively and lived in. And of course there's going to be quests to find, and there's even a bulletin board with various activities to do. You know, I was honestly filled with so many different emotions when I saw what they did with Kalm. I loved every little detail that was there. It felt like how I imagined it when I first played Final Fantasy VII. And if this is what we can expect for all of the towns, that is mind-blowing. So now, let's take a look at combat. Remake already has one of my favorite combat systems of all time. They beautifully mix together an action RPG with turn-based elements, and Rebirth is building upon that already incredible foundation. And the big new highlight is, of course, the synergy attacks. So there's actually two types of synergy attacks. One type are completely free to use. They don't even cost ATB. This is a great way to give players something to do while waiting for their ATB charges, which was one of the very few downsides to Remake's combat. It could feel kind of slow when you didn't have any ATB to spend. So an example of this kind of synergy attack would be Tifa jumping on Cloud's sword and then being thrown into the air, making the aerial combat a lot more smooth. That was actually one of my other nitpicks with Remake's combat, and now with synergy attacks and having more control over your party, it's really looking like it won't be an issue here. So the other type of synergy attacks use those tiny bars under the ATB, and of course, they are far more powerful than the free ones. But they aren't just more powerful, they also grant your party additional buffs. Like for example, some of them might increase the length of a stagger, or even grant infinite NP for a short time. So they add even more strategy to the combat. You can time them to do a ton of damage, or save your party from the brink of death. Another fantastic change to the combat is that every character can now freely dodge roll, without having to use a materia slot. That is a huge quality of life improvement. There's also a parry mechanic now that, yet again, every character can freely use without materia. So now, if you block an attack right as it's about to hit you, you parry it, take 0 damage, and also greatly increase the enemy's stagger. So between exploiting enemy weaknesses and parrying their attacks, a skilled player can very quickly get an enemy to stagger. So, with having more party members, new materia, freely being able to dodge and parry, the synergy attacks, the combat for this is looking absolutely fantastic. Thinking about the future, I cannot wait to see how it evolves going forward. So minigames were a very memorable part of the original, and we saw even more of them in this presentation. They showed us a very brief glimpse of a card minigame, and you know, what would an open world JRPG be without some kind of card game? So yeah, looking forward to learning more about that. There's also some kind of chocobo racing or some kind of course to run while out in the world. However, the big highlight was a rhythm game that is played on the piano, and as someone who loves rhythm games, I was very excited to see this. So the piano minigame in the original was very basic, and just there to get Tifa's limit break. But now, it's a full-fledged game with multiple stages. And it looks like it could get pretty challenging. They simulate playing piano with your left and right hand by making you control the left and right analog sticks. And if they put 2 completely different rhythms on the 2 sticks, I can see that becoming very hard. That's actually one of the biggest hurdles for new piano players, learning how to play different rhythms on each hand. It takes a lot of practice. So yeah, the game is looking amazing. They are really embracing exploration in Rebirth. You can swim, you can climb, there are various chocobos that open up even more options for exploration. And most importantly, they are giving us reasons to want to explore. The combat is looking insane, and if every area is getting this kind of attention, yeah, they would have to monumentally screw something up for this not to be Game of the Year. Anyways, that'll be all for this one. Thank you all so much for watching. How hyped are you for Rebirth? Let me know down in the comments. And until next time, bye!